Okay, well, welcome everybody to our little live chat this morning of how to add or start to use ChatGPT in your classroom. And a lot of teachers have been asking, like, how can I do it before the end of the year so I can think about it during the summer and come back with some really good ideas. So I'm Holly Clark. I live in San Diego, California. I've started the Infuse Classroom series, and I'd like to have my co-host introduce herself.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm Rochelle Dene Poth, and excited for this learning here today with all of you and with Holly. Of course, we're gonna have a great conversation, so can't wait.
So thanks, and we're gonna it's gonna take me a second, there we go, to figure out what we're doing, but there's our information. But if you happen to have, and I'll have Rochelle put this in the chat in YouTube. If you happen to be watching with us, we'd love if you use this Padlet, so that if you are using this, because we see some people said that they are like a level 5 user of ChatGPT and AI, we'd love to know ways that you're thinking of using it or using it in your classroom. And if you're not a user of ChatGPT, what ideas have been floating around in your mind for how it might be used in the classroom? So we're going to get started with this fun little video, and hopefully the sound works. I didn't check that. I should have. And you know what? It's not going to work because the way they made me put in the slides for this presentation. So let me just tell you what happens here. So this is South Park. It's super funny. And all of a sudden the teacher is passing back these papers, and they are like, really well written papers by this group of kids who we've grown to know are kind of like, the average kid in class. And it's like, oh, this kid just turned out back one on the uh the I can't even remember the names, but really good papers. And he's like, oh, and now to our Check Plus Club is so and so because he did such a good paper. And I think when people think about ChatGPT, this is what they think. Kids are going to go use it just to do the homework and not really think about anything and start turning in stuff that's way beyond their level. And so we're hoping today to show you some things that you can do with ChatGPT that will that are different, that will make you rethink what this can look like. So I also want to talk about one other thing that we need to consider. And those kids sitting in our kindergarten classes, and it's so fun to see where all of you are from right now. New Zealand, Portugal, Florida, Houston. Ooh, Houston. I say Houston because they just had the Taylor Swift concert not long ago. So I was watching it. But anyway, we have kids sitting in our classroom who are going to graduate in 2035. And right now we are on ChatGPT 4. I've already seen previews of 5, people already talking about it. And we're in ChatGPT 4. When kids graduate in 2035, what level of AI are we going to be at? And we have to remember these same kids are going to go into their retirement in 2085. So for me, that's a difference of 100 years of what my classroom looked like in 1985 and what we're preparing kids for. And I will be honest, I do walk by some classrooms even to this day, because that's one of the things I do. I work with a lot of districts and I get to see classrooms all over the nation. I'm going to South Africa tomorrow. I get to see classrooms all over, and I do see a bit of 1985 teaching. And I'm not blaming anyone. I think there's not enough training going on, to be honest. But we have to remember we're preparing kids for 2085. So as we do that, we're going to go in a little bit and talk about ChatGPT in the classroom. So Rochelle, I'm going to let you go.
No, it's the things that have changed, like it's crazy trying to keep up with it. And earlier this week, and I was telling Holly about this, that there was an article that I had read, and it talked about, it was from district administration. And they were talking about, there's a call for educators to really embrace AI. And I think that's just something in general that we have to do, is embrace technology, whether or not like we understand it initially, or we think like, it's going to give, like that South Park thing, the easy way out. But I don't think, realistically speaking, like as long as we've all been educators or when we were students, there were ways to get around doing the work ourselves. And so there's always been, it's either a person or there's some essay writing thing, or there's resources you can copy from a book if it's just non-technology. And so understanding it, but some of the statistics, like you have here on the screen, like the 51% hadn't used, but then there were 40% that said that they had used it once a week. And so I'm curious about, how they did that. And for anybody that's joining in too, how, if you are using it, and we looked at some of the survey responses, so thank you for doing that. But a lot of the things that we do as educators that take time away from our students, like how can it save time for us? Or if our students are not using it in our classrooms, like they're using it outside of the school as well. And so, but do they understand the information? Are they able to process it and sort through it and find out what's real, what's accurate, and versus not? That's the key piece of it. And so when we look at some ideas, I mean, there's no shortage of ideas of how you can use this for yourself as an educator. And then of course, students or anybody in any line of work at this point, it's not just education. And I think that's why it's important for us as educators, because we're in the space with the students to be able to help them to understand how to process and sort information and take from it and then continue to build their skills. So I don't know, that was just like a long, right off the cuff kind of ideas that come to me initially, because a lot of people reached out, and I'm sure to you too, Holly, after we were both doing sessions at conferences earlier this year about, do you think we should ban it? And no, I don't think so. I think we are in the right space to help people understand it. But if we don't take that first step and take that risk and dive in and explore it on our own, then we're not going to be able to help our students. And we may not be able to identify when they actually have used ChatGPT, which
who cares if they've used it though?
I know.
That's the wrong question. Is
right.
So they use ChatGPT. That's a done deal. Yep. It's over with. Now we have to teach them, and this is what today is about, teach them how to use it for bigger and better things rather than just going and putting in the prompt, can you write an essay about this?
Yeah.
We want them to learn how to edit and work within that essay to make it bigger and better. So sorry.
No. But you're right. Like with anything, I mean, even just back to pre-technology, going to the library, the librarian would still try to teach you how to properly cite your sources and how to find the information, how to find with the Dewey Decimal System. So we still had to learn it. We were still going to the sources. It just took more time. Now we have this available to us where it's no different than doing a Google search for the information. It just streamlines it. But you still have to have those skills to sort through it and develop and create something to go beyond that. So, and we have to be curious too, which Dr. Hari, hey, thanks for joining in from the future, I like to say. But yeah, we have to embrace it and understand it and not just immediately say no, which is what I did, for a long time.
And that's what I'm saying. It's too late. The kids are going to use it, but this is where we have to teach them what are called now AI literacies. And I write about this in the book that's coming out, I think Monday. It was supposed to come out Friday, but we had a little glitch. I wanted to change something, but we have to understand the bias, the misinformation, and all of those kinds of things. And that's super, super important. And I think as educators, we have let that go for too long. We didn't teach students what we needed to when they were searching. But now that the information has shifted and it's much more, it's a way bigger data set than the internet, we have to help them understand those things. And so I don't want to talk about my book. It's just, I just wrote it. So that's fresh in my mind. There are 4 AI literacies that kids need to know. And we need to teach them how to interact with this AI and to get better things from it, to understand where the bias and misinformation is. And I just want to say a shout out to Gabby. I believe that's Gabby, who was the one I came to her school and worked with her teachers. And you can let me know, Gabby, in Peru. So that's super thrilling to me. Beautiful campus there. So let's talk about now where we want to share with you 3 ideas for using it in the classroom. And when we talk about, when we talk about the ethical part, teaching students how to use it, I want to show you an example that I just did with this fabulous 2nd grade teacher at a school that I'm working with here in San Diego. But wait, before I go on, do you have anything else to say, Rochelle?
No, okay. I'm just checking out the comments and everything and excited. So dive into the 2nd grade, because I think there were, in our survey, there were a lot of educators who were in that K-6 band, and they just want ideas. How can I do this? And can I even do this? So let's dive in.
Yeah, so I was super excited. I was showing these teachers at EdPD about ChatGPT, and I was just like, just know that that's out there because that's what we're preparing kids for. And then we were doing some work, and one of the teachers came to me and she said, I want to try that ChatGPT in my class. And I said, you have second graders. And she's like, you would be surprised at what they can do. So obviously, we cannot use ChatGPT with the second grader using ChatGPT. So we decided to design something that would allow them to get this first look at what an AI can do. And we talked about ethical issues beforehand. And I kind of broke it down to the students as this is a robot that you're talking to. That's kind of was kind of a hook for them.
Mhm.
And this robot can only respond to you via text, sort of the way that you might text your mom or dad. Soon it will be able to respond other ways, but you're getting a first look. And so we did an example of asking it something, and we used at that time GPT-4 so that it was really quick. And they were like, whoa. And second graders can't read that quick. So we read really quick as it was going as best that we could. And they were just like in awe. And these kids, it was the greatest thing to see. They were like sitting on their chair, like, what is this? I can't believe. And then they think I'm the one who like came up with AI because they're little guys, right? And they're like, this is so cool, Miss Clark. Thanks for this. And I'm like, I didn't come up with it. So I want to show you a picture of how this went down. And this takes a really good teacher, actually. I probably, because I don't work with second grade as much as I work with middle school, I may not have thought of this myself. And you can see she has these, we're going to look at story elements with these kids, and the kids are going to write a story using different story elements. So she has the setting, theme, and support and characters in all of them. I just have a picture of it, but there's all parts of the story there. And she takes it, as you can see in the third picture, and she puts it on each table. And each table is going to decide on part of that story element. So she also on the back, and this is what I love, this scaffolding, she gave ideas like, I mean, they're 7. And so she's like, for setting, it could be this, this, and this. And so that helped them to come up with these ideas. You can see the kids in that third one doing that. So then we put in this prompt. You are a children's book author. And remember, we're just doing this on the computer and it's going on the screen. Kids are never coming and doing it or going into ChatGPT. I do want to warn everyone about something that happened, though. 2 things I thought were interesting that happened. Anyway, you're a children's author, book author, write a very short story. I had to come to this because it wrote a whole story that was too long for them to read. So we had to change the prompt to go to a short story for an audience of second graders using these story elements. So setting, we call on the kids and get the setting, the time, meaning like summer break or whatever, main character. And after each of those things, we would put what they put in. And you can see from here that here they are discussing. And then when we did it the first time, the main character was a dragon, the supporting character was a dog, and you can see what happens. And then ChatGPT produced a story, and they were like, whoa, and they loved it. And I thought that part might be a little boring, but here's what happened. So here's a little girl reading it, and they took turns reading it. And that part I probably would progress and go past. But here's what happened. So as a 7th grade language arts teacher, whenever I give narratives, kids are like, I'm going to do a magic pizza with the dragon. And it's always the worst stories. These kids actually said after the story was done, I don't know if dragon was such a great idea. And I was like, yeah, telling me, and so they started to talk to each other, and we did another round because they're like, can we do another one? Oh my gosh. And I had kids saying, how do I get to this at home? And I'm like, you can't. It's only for 13 and over. But they were like, this is the coolest thing we've ever done, Miss Clark. And we tried to explain to them about AI, but it was the critical thinking that happened. And we were just reviewing story elements, which needs to happen. And then they were starting to critically think about, dragon. And listen, ChatGPT wrote a pretty good story about a dragon and a dog, but you could see that it would have been better with a person and a dog. And you might see in that middle one, the event or problem is someone dies. And they started to talk about that. That was really sad. And, whatever. So we decided the superintendent of San Diego Unified School District was coming to the school the next 4 days later or whatever. So we decided to up the game. And we decided that each group would come up with all of those story elements this time, and they would have them on a piece of paper. And they would come to me and the teacher, the actual teacher, and we would throw those in really quick and they'd get a story. So then we put that story, and this got a little, this might have been a too high level for them. And we talked about this, but we had them cut and paste the story into Book Creator. And it was the cut and pasting for some of the kids at 7 years old, that many paragraphs that wasn't, we might have found a better way, but they put it into Book Creator for their group, and they each changed the story to meet their kind of needs. And so they were using sort of, let's call it like this base story, and they upped it once they had that like beginning part where there really were the good story elements. And I'm telling you, I walked away from that day like I could barely talk. I was so jazzed about how well this went and how excited the kids were. But here's the funny part. So the superintendent comes in and he's watching, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Have you used ChatGPT?" And he's like, "No." And I thought that was very interesting. And they said to a kid, he said, "Okay, open it up. Let's see what ChatGPT can do." And I'm like, "Hold the phone. He's 7. He can't, but come over and I'll show you," kind of thing. And so that's how that went down. And this could happen in first grade. This could happen as a beginning place to see where these kids, do they understand AI? But we had them next go to Microsoft Flip, where we asked them, "Okay, what happened? What was going on? What did you notice about this lesson?" And we got some really good information. They don't really get AI. They're not going to for a minute, but they got the idea that something was producing in a way they've never seen before. So I thought that was really interesting. Anything to talk about there as well, Rochelle?
Well, lots of things, but it's just, I think often, I mean, for myself too, I would say, I'm just a Spanish teacher, or, I mean, I teach a STEAM course now too. So we cover lots of things. AI is a huge topic that we cover. And I started to talk to my 8th graders back in December about ChatGPT, and a few of them knew about it because like their parents have been talking about it as well. But I think sometimes, we underestimate our own like capacity or ability to understand some of these things. And we think that we have to be an expert or we have to know everything. I mean, number one, we have to know about the privacy and security and safety because that's essential, and who we're working with. I mean, 2nd grade, of course, 8th graders. But the other piece too is like, we don't have to be the expert. We just have to find some kind of an activity, a way to bring it in, because the kids are going to be exposed to and interact with it potentially in our classrooms or outside of it. But I love, their curiosity, and then the way that it gets them to think differently. And there were comments too, like, the critical thinking, or to like, if you have the right hook to set it up with the right activities, it's not just about learning, the technology and ChatGPT and what it can do, but it's sorting through all the information, all of those types of things. They're learning the content in a different way, but it's also helping them at a different level, like collaborate and interact with their classmates and with us as the teachers too. So like, I see so many benefits that before I wouldn't necessarily have seen. But once you do some of these activities and you see the kids kind of taking on the lead and like they're curious about it, I think that's where like the real learning happens. And then discussion too, because then they're like, well, wait a minute, I don't like, why did it come up with that? And, I could share examples later too of some of the fun things that we did in my classroom as well. Back, it was in December, and I had the kids just coming up with ideas to create stories, and then I had them reading the stories, and they were adding voices to it. So there are a lot of fun things that you can do with it to just generate. And even some of the students would say, like, who would ever like speak like that? Like, who would ever write like that? And it's very curious. And then we talk about things like, well, do you think your teachers would know that you didn't write this? And some of them said, well, yeah, because they've been with me in this class all year, and they know the way that I write, and they know the way that I speak and the words that I use. And I say, yeah, so like, how could you use this, or why wouldn't you potentially use this? So there's so many different ways to kind of like embrace it, but also be a little bit, I don't want to say guarded, but the only word that comes to me right now is guarded with it, because you have to ensure that safety, but you also have to embrace those opportunities to learn and have fun with it too. Like we did the other night, we were like just typing in things, and like you could lose so much time, but
And I will say this teacher was willing to do it because she's looking for an administrator position right now, and she's having to write a lot of cover letters. And she came to me and she said, I had ChatGPT write my cover letter last night. I love this thing. And that's when she's like, let's try it with my kids. And I'm like, I was the one who was like, but they're 7. And it turned out so great. So we have another lesson that we want to talk about. The 3 that we're going to do are going to revolve around 2 for kids and 1 for a teacher. And I'm just going to start this one and we'll go back and forth on it. But this is what I'm calling, I kind of renamed it the recall experiment, because recall is such an important part of pedagogy. If students can recall information, that's part of the process that makes learning stick. So in this one, students start by working alone to recall 10 important things about a past unit of study. So they're doing this maybe to prepare for standardized tests or to see what they learned during the school year. And then once they got their 10 down, they break up into groups of 4 to create the most complete list of 10 that they can come up with. So that group's going to be tasked with, you got to come up with the best list of the 10 things we should remember about this. And in those groups, they're going to be assigned certain things. So here's what it looks like. In group 1, once you get to group 1 after you've done your 10, you're going to work together and you can collaborate and share your 10 until you can make the most complete list ever. In group 2, you're going to collaborate, but you're going to get to add the textbook. So these 2 have no tech at all. And then in group 3, you're going to have access to the internet. So you're going to get blog posts about it. But group 4 is going to have access to the ChatGPT. Now, that's only when they're 13 or over. You could do it where group 4 works with the teacher if you wanted to do it like with 7th grade or 6th grade, because I think they could handle this. I love it. What's a textbook? Yes, thank you. But anyway, some people still have them in their classrooms. And it makes for a very good activity for the students to see the difference. So the prompt might look something like, list 10 most important ideas to know. So when the kids are going to ChatGPT, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. I just see the time. So list the 10 most important ideas to know about. And I used in the sample you're going to see in a second about the Constitution. And we're going to use Constitution in another one. And what should every student know about the Constitution? Or play devil's advocate. Here's our list of 10 that we've settled on. What are we missing here? And have it come up with things that it could do better. So now we have these 4 activities. Now, anyone who knows me knows I'm going to go to Padlet and have them put their 10 things up. And now we're going to guess. And I kind of get this guessing activity from something that Donnie Piercy did with like Find the Bot. They're going to do something similar and they're going to share it. So let's look at that. So I made it kind of an example of, we don't know the groups, but now they're going to put their 10 things. They're going to read through them. And FYI, teachers, they're going to read through them 4 more times, things about the Constitution as a review. Like, hello, that's really good. And then they're going to comment and try and guess which of these groups used what device and see who comes the closest to like getting the best guess. But in all this, they're doing a recall activity, which is pedagogically sound. They're rereading other people's ideas. They're collaborating, they're sharing, but they're getting to work with tech and no tech. And then later they will discuss that. So now it's time to discuss it and be like, what worked? Who was the actual people who got to use ChatGPT? And I've done something similar with some 8th graders. And I even saw other educators talk about this on Facebook. It's what gave me the idea. I never want to say these are all my ideas, but the kids who used ChatGPT thought that they had it easy, and it wasn't always the case. They didn't know how to prompt, and that's what I found out. So don't forget that we have a Padlet link, and if you could, I'll put that in. And if you are trying something in your class or thinking of things, we'd love to hear more. I'll put that in right now because I'm going to pass it over to Rochelle, who's going to talk more about this and then the next activity.
Yeah, so definitely would love to have people post things on the Padlet, because in the survey, if you filled it out, there were a lot of really great ideas about the different types of prompts and the ways that people have been using it. But I love whenever Holly and I talked about this the other night, thinking about, how could you have students kind of working in those different groups and then thinking about like reflecting, especially this time of the year where they've gone through the year of learning, whatever the topic is, content area that you teach. And what are 10 things that you've learned about, or tell me 10 things about this. And so you want them to recall, and they will all recall something different. but then that collaboration that would happen within those different groups. And I crack up at the, like, what's a textbook? And I do have a lot of textbooks in my classroom, but we keep them in the classroom. We bring them out whenever they're needed, but it gives them a chance. And I think just even the, the critical thinking and processing all of that information in different ways, and how, like Holly showed, those different components of having the textbook and having the internet and these resources. I also think it's fun too for those of us that didn't have all of this available when we went to school and we had to do similar learning experiences, or we had to do research, and we had to rely on, hands-on materials and sort through all of the books. I don't remember really working in small groups and doing things like this. Like, it was always like a solo kind of individual at the library, like you did your own thing and that was it. But I think that this is a really good way for any grade level that you teach. And even if you're not, because we have some people, there were a lot of people that responded that you are tech coaches, which is great, because now you're going to work with teachers. And I know as a teacher and somebody who works with teachers and is working with students or whoever, getting teachers to try things. And I am an educator. And so I know that it's like, oh, it's just one more thing, or I don't know how to make this work. Like, this is an idea that you can use any grade level and get students to work on it. And that recall is so important. And I think too, just the conversation that would happen, like, oh, well, I only had the book to use, or I had to rely on my own information. Like, everything's out there on the internet. I know that. But at the end of the day, like, you still need to have that information to be able to, like, take it and build upon it and extend that learning beyond simple recall of, like, fact for fact. And so I like that, this gives them a different experience. And maybe you do this a couple of times, like maybe for most of us are at the end of the school year, and you like this idea, try it next week, see how it goes. And then maybe you do it again and you rotate the groups. So each, like if you have 4 groups, each group gets that same experience, but they rotate so they know what that process is like. And they can see, like, oh yeah, I should rely on myself for this information. Or, you know what, I didn't totally understand this. So this is when I would go and I would look at a resource on the internet, or I would check my writing with ChatGPT. Although still knowing that, like, there might be mistakes that are out there, because not everything that you come across on the internet is 100% accurate, as we have learned.
And it also has bias. Oh, let me turn the page. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah. So, I mean, just like somebody else said too, it was Dr. Harvey said earlier, like, embracing those opportunities. And Gabby has a question for what level, Holly?
Gabby, are you talking about the thing that we just did? And I think she might be. And we envisioned that. I did it with 8th graders, something similar, but we envision it from 6th to 12th grade.
Right.
And it revolves around the discussion of it, because we want the kids to see ChatGPT doesn't always give us the best. It was a little dry, some of the answers, things like that. You could actually do it with 2nd grade, but right now I'm sticking with the story elements right now.
Yeah. And I can do it with language too. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to use it. Even just in and I'll just throw this one out there too, because my STEAM class, when we did this, I said, let's just create a story. Give me some random things. And I've done this at conferences, actually at TCA. I think I did this in FETC earlier this year. I wanted it to write in Spanish, and I wanted it to include, because I was doing a presentation about AI, the metaverse, and all of these, like Bitcoin, blockchain, you name it. And I threw out, like, write a story with green in Spanish about a fox, Bitcoin, and whatever. And it did it. And then I tweaked it a little bit with a different prompt, and it changed it, but it somehow tied all of those things together. Now, my STEAM class, they were throwing out really interesting ideas, and then they read the story and we analyzed it. I mean, it was a fun activity to do, just to see how it worked, how quickly it was, some of the word choices that were in there, like I said, whether or not they would use those. But it's just a fun thing to embrace, especially at the end of the year, where you might be feeling like, oh no, like, we still have 3 more weeks of school, we have to do all this review. Then assuming, if you can use this in your classroom, and if not, of course, you can maybe get the prompts from some of the kids, and you as the educator could put them into ChatGPT wherever you can and it works, and take some screenshots and share that with them and say, like, oh, okay, what do you think that it would say? Or let's analyze what it came up with compared to what you've learned in the classroom. And I think that's one thing, and I'll share this last thing just as I'm thinking about it. So as a language educator, or any educator, that, when students plagiarize things, if they've copied it from whatever website, you can tell, again, because of the level of the word choices. Or for me as a language educator, if I'm teaching Spanish 1 and I have students turn in something that's written in, like, a very advanced grammatical structure, they didn't study that. And I know that. And so I will tell them. Just this week, I had a conversation with a few where the words are literally in the book on the page. And we all know that like everything you need is in the book. We're not asking you to go out on some massive scavenger hunt. But I said, here's the problem. Like, yes, it will get you the answer, but it's not in alignment with the vocab that you're learning or the content that we've covered in class. And so that's where the disconnect happens, is like, you're not actually practicing what we've learned and applying it in a different way. It's kind of giving you different information. And then it's like, you're learning two different like bulk areas that you have to kind of put into one. And I think that's the reminder we have to give students too, is like, okay, it's great as a resource and to kind of check things. And there's, again, no end to the things that you can do with it, but having those conversations. And oh yeah, Dr. Harvey says like, it still can't do multi-step physics questions. His job is still safe this week, but you never know, right? Because it's evolving and it's changing.
Well,
So
all our jobs are safe if we
yeah,
learn to work in symbiosis with the
right.
AI.
I love that word too. Have a symbiotic relationship with the ChatGPT.
It's your turn. So
yeah.
we're going to talk about the teaching opportunities. Now we're going to look, so you can talk about what we're going to do now.
All right. So we were talking the other day about, things that educators can do, like what takes up a lot of your time, or even again, at the end of the year, the start of the year, whatever point of the year, if you've been teaching something for a long time, many years, there might be a topic that even you think like, oh no, it's that thing I have to teach again, or it's a difficult concept for students to understand. Or you want to tie in a lot of things like maybe project-based learning or STEM or all these different topics, social emotional learning, and pull that all together. But like that time factor, there's never enough time in the day. So how can we as educators embrace opportunities that like, how can we use it not to like totally do our work for us, because that's not the idea, but to spark some ideas for us, or to maybe, a lot of people that said that they used it was for lesson plans. And for some schools, educators are required to have lesson plan with standards and key terms and all of these different components that take a really long time to think through. Or Holly and I talked the other night about teachers who are just starting, first-year teachers. And that's tough to come into a school, a new job, and you have so many things to do that can be very time consuming. And sometimes we just need that little spark, or like a sentence starter or a prompt of our own to get into something. And it helps us to like, oh, I can write this lesson plan now. Or maybe we don't know all the answers, which I don't know all the answers. I'm not an expert. And I might want some different ideas. And so being able to type in a prompt that says like, you know what, create a lesson plan for me to teach about narrating in the past tense. Give me some discussion questions, some example questions, some research, whatever I want. And then I can build upon that. Or if you have learners who are, struggling learners. So maybe you have lesson plans that you've created, and then you put that in and you ask it to like give you some additional ideas to allow for students of different, learning styles and preferences when it comes to, technology or hands-on learning opportunities, for example.
Can I?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
No. I just wanted to, as we go into this next lesson, I do a lot of international presentations. So I always want to apologize when we do something that's a little United States centric, which we're going to do next. We're going to use the Constitution here, but everyone has some sort of document in their country. But we don't mean to be so American centric.
Right.
It comes naturally because we have to teach these things.
Right. Yeah. So do we talk about this one, how we did this one the other day? Okay. So my go-to was always photosynthesis for some reason. I don't know why it is, but we were talking a lot about like, things like the Constitution in this case. And so I just started to generate some prompts, and Holly was giving me some ideas on how to like tweak it a little bit. So these are the prompts that I put into it. So I thought, okay, let's look at the difference between the communication that happened when they wrote the Constitution all those years ago, and how would the communication change like if it occurred in 2020. So that was the first prompt, and that prompt that you see on the screen is exactly how I typed the prompt in, and I took a screenshot. And what I liked, and I think Holly had a similar response, is like, it's impossible to say exactly how, because we were doing like singers and everything too, like trying to tweak it to say how it would. But what happened is whenever it gave those responses, like it was interesting because number one, of course, was like it would increase the use of technology. Communication would have been faster. They could communicate more effectively, all of those things, which we know because we use technology and we're all here joining in from around the world. And then it also brought in like political perspectives and diverse perspectives. And I thought that that was key as well, like that it pulled in the fact that it would have more representation of people from different backgrounds, experiences, and everything. So then Holly said, okay, now type in, okay, this is great. Now write a lesson plan to unpack these ideas. And if you haven't used ChatGPT, like open up a tab right now, go dive in, and maybe type in the exact same prompts that we did, or think of something that you are teaching and do the same kind of comparative analysis between like the year that it happened. And then I picked 2020 when I did it, and see what it comes up with. And then you think, okay, now I got this lesson plan, tweak the lesson plan. How can I bring this in with these ideas, which it then did. And it broke it down into, your objectives and materials and like your activities. And it even gave you the times to do that. And maybe you need that lesson plan because like we're doing all of the other things and there's not enough time. And so you take that and you use it, and that's the starting point. And I know I've had friends, even myself, that said like, I can't think of a good way to do this, but it was just a very basic prompt. And then we continued to tweak it. So then we thought, okay, now you want students to do projects. And so technology is great, but you want to use it for a purpose. Hands-on is great. So what would, how could you have students do something that was based on their needs, interests, and all of that? So the final prompt was like, what could they do after they unpacked it? And it came up with a bunch of different ideas for final projects, some of which involved, hands-on, some of it did not involve technology, but being able to have them think through and look at and analyze what the differences would be. And then within those ideas, like then you have other conversations and students are building those skills, the critical thinking, the problem solving, they're communicating, they're sorting through information. And maybe even in whatever that prompt, when it generates the response, like maybe it's inaccurate because you still have to do your fact checking as well. Because again, not everything that comes through is accurate because somebody put it out there. Maybe it's information pulled from a blog. It was just somebody's opinion. Like you don't necessarily know all the time. And I've had some things written about like my experience in education. Apparently I have a PhD, which that's awesome. I didn't know that I did that, but I think it's neat to just dive into something like that. So thinking about if you're still in school, what is something that you're teaching that's coming up, or maybe it's the end of the year and there's like a big concept that students really need to know and retain, like the Constitution. United States, again, we need to understand like the Constitution. So drawing upon that, but in your own experience, what is something that all students need to know? And then start with that prompt and just copy the same one I did, just change your information. But like comparing it, especially if there's like many, hundreds of years in between, and we know how much technology and things have changed, what impact would that have made? Or add in a person, like, I forget who we did the other day.
Beyonce or Taylor Swift.
Yeah, Beyonce, Taylor Swift. Destiny's Child was in there, and it was the Revolutionary War. But it's fun to dive in. So if you have time today, thank you, Frank. Even though it's not true, but that's okay. Apparently, it's true. If you have time today, like right now, multitask. Put in a couple. Like have it write something about you. Have it generate a couple of ideas that maybe when you go to school on Monday, you can just give it a try and see what it's like, and get the students' responses too, and involve them in the conversation. And I know I give a shout out because one of my students joined in here a little while ago. I saw the name. Oh. Yeah, and we've talked about it. And one of their assessments that I had done, I just asked ChatGPT to come up with, I think, like 15 different multiple choice questions about the past tenses. And the way that, some of them were really good questions, but some of them, they were not right. It was not grammatically like correct. And so I thought, if I would have just given this to them, like they would have caught it. And they did actually catch one mistake. And I told them, I was honest. I said, look, I made up this assessment. I have some of the questions I made, and some of them I used ChatGPT just to see what it would come up with. And they were like, these are kind of odd sentences. And they were. And those were the ones that were generated by ChatGPT because it didn't have that like human component of it, like of how I would talk or examples that I would give in the classroom.
So if I can jump in, the thing I liked here is that teachers generally, when they hear about ChatGPT, say, oh, I can go ask it for lesson plans, which we did initially. And it gave some lesson plans for the Constitution. But then using the idea of transfer of knowledge, which is involved in deeper learning, what would that look like in 2020? And now we have to have the kids say, do they agree or disagree with what they're saying would be different in 2020? And that shows critical thought around what they're looking at. You have to know the Constitution, which we're learning a lot of people who are even in Congress don't know the Constitution, but you have to understand the Constitution to be able to compare it with the 2020 things that might look differently. So there's massive amounts of critical thinking happening there, as well as pedagogy in terms of that transfer of knowledge. Now, there we in that prompt 3, what final projects could students do after unpacking and comparing these two is where it went next. So we wanted you to take like a little short path with us from just that basic. It can write a lesson plan for us. I see a lot of teachers saying, oh, I could get it to give me feedback on a student's paper. And I want to put a big red X anywhere I need to put it. Why would we get feedback for a student's paper? Why wouldn't students ask for that feedback? I think in that first instance, we're just substituting in what we're already doing, and we're not thinking how information has changed. So how can we put the learning back in the hands of the students? And that's what we were trying to come up with. So when you're working as a teacher and you're going to go put in some lesson plans, think about that next step. Where's that transfer? What it would look like in 2020? And then what are projects they could do? There was just an idea of putting that 2020 lens on something.
Yeah. And the one other thing I'll say, because if anybody's curious about, because I did not put the projects that it came up with in there, but it was a variety. And I'm trying to think back to what they were. Like one of them was launch a social media campaign, and they can work in groups and they can have a social media campaign, and it promotes like an amendment to the Constitution or some aspect of the Constitution. They could do some historical fiction writing, I think, and imagine what it would be like if the founding fathers had the modern communication tools like we have, and then how that might have changed the actual drafting of the Constitution. There was another one where they would rewrite a modern Constitution and then use the technology, bring in diverse perspectives, and how that would then shape like the writing of the document, and then present it to the class in each group, and then have discussions about like the similarities and differences between what they wrote in, between the groups, and then also between the original Constitution and what, not only the technology, how that would impact it, but the change in like the people and the perspectives and the experiences too. So there were, hands-on, no tech, because you're just writing. And then you had like social media. So it was pulling in a lot of elements, but it came up with like a lot of different ideas, which is kind of neat, especially if it's at the end of the school year, or during the school year, you're looking for some new ideas to kind of stretch, and you want to give students a lot of opportunities to really connect in a way that's meaningful and authentic to them. That's a lot of fun to do.
So these are 3 things to consider, from our second grade example to our middle example where kids are going into groups of 4. And obviously we don't all have classrooms where we can put kids just in groups of 4. Maybe 2 of them are doing ChatGPT and 2 of them are doing textbooks. Obviously whatever works for you. But I would highly advise keeping those groups small, as kids, if anything over 4, the 5th and 6th kid doesn't often get involved in the way that they should. So, and we see some examples coming up in the chat. So if you're paying attention in the chat, people are really liking what Angela Smith said. She said, I used, I'm assuming ChatGPT, to generate models of poetry that had this, and then had the students compare the models to the rubric. Then they gave the poems a grade based on the rubric and told me why they would give them this grade. I did the same thing with poetry with Taylor Swift's really big right now in America, because she has a tour going on. And I said, pick 10 songs that Taylor Swift writes, and let's use them for a poetry unit. And it said, okay, you're going to use this song for irony and satire. You're going to use this song for this. And it gave me all the prompts for that. And for the kids who may not like Taylor Swift, I could say, who do you like? And then have ChatGPT give me examples in poetry. Maybe they like Drake, if I could get some clean songs, or Beyonce, or whatever. It can be based on their passions now. And I tried to do that in my book, is really write about how do we use this for deeper learning. I see people saying, let's use it to write quiz questions. And I'm like, no, let's use it to develop lessons that no longer require quiz questions. Now, I understand if you're teaching physics, you might need a couple quiz questions just to make sure. But I'm talking at certain different subject levels. So we are super thankful that you came today. I wanted to just really quickly, I don't know. Oh, there's also 15 ways to shift writing instruction with ChatGPT in our slide deck. And we'll put that slide deck, maybe Rochelle can do that right now,
Yep.
back in so you have access to this. This is from my book. You can do it with brainstorming sessions and collaborative storytelling. This collaborative storytelling is what we did with second graders, basically. And you can look at all of these. I really like the AI assisted editing because in writing my book, The AI Infused Classroom, ChatGPT did not write the book for me, but did it help me with like feedback? Absolutely. And I talk about the process in the book, how much it helped me or didn't help me. And so we have those, and then there's the book, and it's coming out, I think Monday, hopefully.
Hey.
Just yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to go back to the beginning so you all can see this link as well. I think that some of you may not be watching from this time period, so we want you to have this. It's called Infuse. Oh, it looks weird on my screen as I'm putting
and I dropped it in the chat too.
Yeah.
I think I got the right one. Yeah.
So it's infuse.link/AI3. You got to this thing through 3AI, so I tried to keep it the same. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Anything you'd like to say to end this, Rochelle?
No, it's great. Like, I'm so glad that we did this. And like teachers, we never stop learning because it's a weekend or it's evening, wherever you're joining from, or if you're watching later on and recording. But we need to share our ideas, and that's where we learn. And so you might think, well, I don't really know how to use this in my role as a classroom teacher, as administrator, whatever your role is, because there are so many. Some of us are wearing like multiple hats and have those roles, but just sharing the ideas. So please drop them onto the Padlet in this conversation here on YouTube is great. I know that we'll continue to share, and then we will follow up with some of those responses from the survey. And if you didn't do the survey, you can still do that survey too, because reading through that and seeing the experiences of other people really gave me some ideas, especially at the end of the school year here. So we appreciate for sure everybody who joined in and shared examples. Yeah, that's it. Just dive in. If you haven't yet, dive in today, see what you come up with, but just give yourself a timer, because you might just keep going, and next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by and you've just spent it with ChatGPT. It can happen. True story.
Yeah. And thank you so much. You can go back into that slide deck and watch the funny South Park episode, and also see a video of some of the things I asked ChatGPT around a book that we read here in the United States called The Outsiders, which was a really interesting way to look at like the things you can ask it. So thank you, everyone. And we're so thrilled that you came from all over the world. And even I see our last person commenting who's from Houston, even from our middle states and all over. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful Saturday.
Yeah, thanks.